Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. If you're new to us, you can find us on meetup.com. Look for Bay Area Content Marketing. Excited today to have Joe Lazauskas, otherwise known as Laser. Joe is head of marketing at Contently. He's going to talk about how you can use neuroscience to create truly memorable content. Joe's author of a book called The Storytelling Edge. I'll grab a link to that in a moment. He's going to reveal the secrets to creating content that sticks through new case studies and research, including a proprietary study he conducted on how voters' brains respond to 2020 political campaign ads. I know it's been a busy day for Joe. He was in a webinar earlier that some of us attended. So Joe, thanks for making time for us, and take it away.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all here. I run marketing at Contently. We're a content marketing technology company that helps brands tell great stories. And this is one of the things I love to geek out about the most is the art and science of storytelling. It's what my book, The Storytelling Edge, is about. But I've also done a lot more additional research since then that I'm excited to share with you here today. So I'm just going to launch into it. There should be plenty of time for questions at the end. So please jot them down, put them in the chat. I'd love to tackle them once I get through, just showing you all some pretty cool stuff. So to start, I want you all to travel back in time with me to the year 2007. It's 2007. Umbrella is the song of summer. Hipsters here in my hometown, New York, are wearing far too much neon. And this man, Dr. Paul Zak, is on an airplane back from a neuroscience conference. Now, Dr. Zak is a pretty impressive guy. He's about 6'5" with the chest to waist ratio of Mr. Incredible. And he's a neuroscientist. It's incredibly jealousy inducing. And Dr. Zak is on this plane back from a neuroscience conference, and he hasn't seen his small kids for a week. And so he's hunched over in the plane on his laptop, just trying to get as much work done as he possibly can. So he's crunched over his laptop and he's kind of typing like a pterodactyl on the plane when suddenly turbulence hits. And I'm not talking about normal turbulence. I'm talking about grab onto your armrest, call out for your mama, we're going down type of turbulence. And so he does what a lot of us would do. To distract himself, he turns on a movie. Lucky for him, this flight had $1 Million Baby, which just won the Oscar for Best Picture. And so as he starts to watch this engrossing, touching father-daughter tale, the world around him just starts to melt away. And before he knows it, the movie's over. And he feels someone grabbing his shoulder and shaking him, going, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he turns. It's the guy next to him in the plane. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And that's when he realizes he's been crying uncontrollably. And so the next day, Dr. Zak went back to his lab and he ran into one of the psychologists on his team. And he told her about this experience that he had on the plane. And he's like, "Isn't that really weird?" And the psychologist looks at him and says, "Actually, not really, because we use stories to change people's moods and mindsets all the time." And so this got Dr. Zak thinking. That there's his thinking face. Because what he and his team in his lab had been studying was oxytocin, which is a neurochemical that at the time we didn't know a lot about. We knew that it triggered feelings of human connection and empathy. We knew that it was synthesized in the brains of mothers when they were with their children. We knew that people who would snort synthetic oxytocin in studies were more likely to give to charity, to feel more giving. But we didn't know a lot more about that and how it was produced or why it was produced. And so this gave him an idea, which is, what if oxytocin, this kind of miraculous love drug, as it's called, wasn't just triggered by human-to-human interaction and connection, but instead could be triggered through story. And that's what his team started to study. And that's what they found out, is that great stories, highly immersive stories, make our brains synthesize oxytocin, this neurochemical that triggers feelings of empathy and human connection. But that's not all that it does. And for this, I'm going to have to give the simplest neuroscience lesson ever. So when we are immersed in a really good story, what Dr. Zak's team found is that the neural activity in our brain increases fivefold. It's kind of like someone has flipped on a switchboard, illuminating the city of our mind. And neuroscientists have this saying that neurons that fire together wire together. So essentially what's happening when we hear a really great story is that all these neurons are firing. As they're firing at the same time, they're wiring together, which is why we're so much more likely to remember something, remember a lesson when it's told to us through a story than when it's told us through a fact sheet or a memo or a really boring PowerPoint presentation. It's because our brains are programmed in this way. And so here we see that stories do two really important things. Stories make us remember, and stories make us care, which if you think about it, is what all brands really want. But there is actually more to Dr. Zach's research that I didn't quite mention yet. So one big question is, where did the funding for all of this come from? And actually came from a really interesting place. So in 2011, DARPA, which is this kind of mysterious agency inside the Department of Defense, they put out an incredibly rare call publicly for neuroscience research because they wanted to understand the science of propaganda. And the reason for that was that in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we were really struggling in America to win over the hearts and minds of civilians who would give key intel on where certain cells were operating, and they wanted them to be on the American side. But their tactics to date weren't really working. Kind of generic, boring radio addresses, dropping leaflets from the sky that were basically just kind of memos and one-pagers, right, and one sheets, and it wasn't working very well. And so they put out this call for neuroscience research, and they ended up funding a lot of these different projects to look into the science of propaganda and the science of storytelling. And this ultimately led to a neuromarketing boom in this new emerging industry, where out of this research, this academic research spawned a few different companies that have really taken off and shown incredibly promising technology that's given us a much deeper understanding of the science of storytelling. Emergent Neuroscience is Dr. Zach's company that came out of Claremont University. There's also Spark Neuro, which has been incredibly well funded by Hollywood to help optimize TV and movies. And then also Neuroinsight, which is a company that I've worked with quite extensively in some research, and that has really interesting technology I'm going to tell you about in a second. But essentially all these different academics, what they realize is, who'd be really interested in this technology is marketers who want to figure out how content, how storytelling, how ads changes people's minds. So here is a shot of me trying out some of the technology, having the sensor strapped to my brain. This is at Spark Neuro. But the coolest one that I did, and the technology that I think is in many ways most fascinating, is at Neuroinsight. And this technology they've developed called Steady State Topography, or SST, which allows them to understand something called memory encoding. So essentially what happens is Neuroinsight's headsets give measure an electrical response, which measures the speed of processing in certain parts of the brain. And from this, they're able to derive top-down processes that indicate key psychological markers like long-term memory encoding and decision-making. And they found that this long-term memory encoding and decision-making part of the brain that's activated helps predict whether we'll remember a brand and ultimately decide to buy something from them. They've been able to demonstrate an 86% link to sales in terms of predictive link to sales when these levels are over a certain threshold. And the key to really these memory encoding that I want to tell you about today is something called branding moments. So our brains love branding moments. They're the key to unlocking purchase consideration, of actually remembering a brand over the long term. But the vast majority of marketers and the vast majority of brands very much fail to take advantage of them. So to explain how this works a little bit more, I want to tell you the story of Cadbury's Gorilla. So Cadbury Gorilla was voted the UK's favorite ad over the last 60 years. But the dirty truth about this ad is that none of the execs wanted to make it. It almost didn't get made. One of the execs said it was a 3 out of 10. And you can kind of understand why when you see it. There's no chocolate in there. There's kind of a weird gorilla as the main character. It's pretty long. But ultimately, one of the execs showed it to their kids. The kids really loved it. And they said, you know what, let's give it a shot. And it ended up being an incredibly effective ad for Cadbury. It led to a 10% increase in sales. And in the 25 1,000 plus ads that NeuroInsight has analyzed, it's in the top 1% of ads for memory encoding. So I'm going to play it for you. And then let's see if you guys have any guesses as to why it was so effective. I was muted myself. Any guesses, anyone here, as to why this was such an effective ad? Any volunteers?
This 80s nostalgia?
It definitely might have played a role, but not quite. Anyone else? And plus, Dennis, I know you know the answer because you're when I talk about this.
Well, it didn't push the product, right? It was just engaging without being promotional.
So that is true, but it actually did push the product in a very subtle and interesting way. So basically is how branding moments work so powerfully. So our brains have this instinct to put anything into a story. No matter what we see, we try and piece a story together out of it. Studies have shown that if you just show people a recording of 3 different shapes, a circle, a square, a triangle, just bumping into each other randomly, we'll construct an entire story out of it. We'll create a conflict. The circle is trying to eat the triangle and the square is protecting it. We'll always create a story in our brains out of anything that we see. So what happens here is that when we start to see this ad, our brain is trying to piece a story together. It's going like, what the hell is the story here? What's going on? When we see the gorilla start to play the drums and be like, what the hell is the story here? And the moment in which our brain pieces everything together is at the very end, when we see the Cadbury chocolate and the Cadbury tagline, a glass and a half full of joy. And our brain goes, oh, I get the story now. And that's the moment where our memory encoding peaks and Cadbury is encoded in our memory. So the next time the Brits who saw this ad went to the store and like in the checkout line and see that chocolate right there, there's a positive association with the ad, the memory of Cadbury, a greater likelihood of noticing it. So you pick up the chocolate, buy it, leads to a 10% increase in sales for the brand. It's so this insertion of your product or the logo at these key moments when your audience's brains are putting the story together is incredibly, incredibly powerful. To sort of show how this works in a B2B instance as well, because I imagine there might be some B2B marketers here, want to show another ad that was incredibly effective at this same dynamic.
Yo, man, I need some clicks.
Okay. I got some choice clicks right here, yo. Impressions, page views, followers.
Are they pure?
Man, I don't cut with bots.
How about likes? You got some likes?
Well, this is a high-class operation.
Come on. Everybody's doing it. I got my whole Q4
Whoa,
budget right here.
Whoa. Easy.
I just need enough to get me through this quarter.
Turn to the right.
Clicks. You were buying clicks. What will I tell the children?
That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast. That's the sound of the police.
So super similarly, engrossing story, but we're like, what is this an ad for? What is the purpose of this? And the moment where you get that realization is when you see the Adobe Marketing Cloud logo. At the end, our brain puts together, it's like, oh, it was about Adobe Marketing Cloud. This is super relatable to me as a marketer. And so it's super, super effective. So this is, as you think about your video content, your product videos, any ads you might be creating for your company, this little branding moments trick is one of the most effective ways to actually get these, higher level awareness ads to actually hit and have an impact over the long term. So some of the keys to creating this sort of memorable content, as I said, inserting those branding moments when the audience's brain is putting the story together. Another thing that in their research they found is showing real people or animals who show emotion from the start of the ad. Like we very much want to be following a main protagonist or character, even if it's a gorilla playing the drums or a middle-aged marketer who's trying to buy clicks like it's drugs, and introducing the narrative of the story really quickly within those first 3 seconds. If you're interested at what this actually looks like when when the Neuroscience system is tracking the activity of someone's brains, this is a real-time recording from the study that we did with Neuroscience around how different political ads impact the brains of Democratic voters. So we did this right before the pandemic. We did this right before the pandemic in December of 2019. And what we wanted to see was how different political ads from the top contenders in the primary, like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, how their different political ads impacted voters' brains and what were sort of the elements that hit the most. So here is an example of what you see in real time across 3 key metrics: the memory encoding, engagement and emotional intensity, and then approach and withdrawal, which is a measure of like whether someone's experiencing that emotion in a positive way, like making you want to lean in to the content, or withdraw away from it because it's like making you feel a little bit weird. So here's what this looks like with this 60-second spot from my girl Liz.
I'm Elizabeth Warren, and I approve this message. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, all 3 of my brothers went off to the military. That was their ticket to the middle class. Now my dream was to be a teacher. I got a scholarship and went off to school, but dropped out and got married at 19. My second chance was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. Today, there are fewer paths to America's middle class and even fewer second chances. Service members are targeted by predatory lenders. Students are crushed by debt. Families can't afford childcare. And after generations of discrimination, people of color face an even narrower path to opportunity. When we have a government that works for the rich and the powerful and leaves everyone else behind, it's corruption pure and simple. We must root it out and return our democracy to the people, and yes, I got a plan for that.
So there's a lot of really interesting things that we found in this analysis. I'm putting in a link in the chat to an article in Fast Company that covers a lot of the key takeaways. But just to kind of bring this to life a little bit more, this was our diagnostic analysis of this ad. And you see the branding moments working in a couple key ways. This ad was in the 98th percentile for memory encoding across the 25,000 ads that Neuroscience has worked on. And there's a couple of things that they did that were really effective here from a political ad perspective. So normally there's like the very dry disclaimer at the beginning, but you actually turn that into a positive, but with a very inspirational picture of Liz at the beginning with her name and her branding at that first opening moment of the ad, where we saw a peak in memory encoding, starting off with a strong story that engaged the reader that then peaked with a picture of Liz when she tells her own story of dropping out of school for marriage. And then also at the very, very end, having this really like inspirational shot of her in front of a cloud with real people experiencing real emotions, and the branding of Warren and the logo. That end branding works really effectively too. And that's actually a common theme that we saw across all the ads that we analyzed, is that showing real people like responding emotionally to a candidate with that sort of branding at the end was super, super effective. So just to the end, wanted to touch on a few other content elements that our brains love that NeuroInsight has found in their research that I thought was really interesting. This is a study specifically of ads in social feeds and streams. So having an early story arc makes it 58% more likely to be viewed past 3 seconds. The presence of people increased emotional intensity by 133%. Topical content was 32% more likely to be viewed past 3 seconds. And text or subtitles led to a 28% higher completion rate. That's also just a good practice now for accessible content, right? Is to upload the SRT file with any social video that you're posting, so everyone can enjoy it. So that's all I got. My one plug here is that, yeah, check out the book. I have a newsletter on this kind of stuff on LinkedIn called The Storytelling Edge. So if you look me up there, it's featured in my profile. You can follow that. And if you ever have any questions, you can email me at lazauskas@gmail.com. But also happy to answer any questions anyone has here in the time we have remaining.
Thanks so much, Joe. Let's see. Let's open it up. Who's got a question?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was kind of curious in the case of that Elizabeth Warren ad, it just seemed like the third panel went up and down incredibly frequently. Is that a standard kind of thing, or is that unusual?
No, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. I'd have to go back and look at it again, to be honest.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that we actually covered in the analysis at all, but I'll have to take another look at that.
Well, I'm curious if you looked at the Phil Collins gorilla ad, would you see a similar kind of thing, or would it be steadily up?
Oh, you mean the third? So the approach withdrawal, you mean specifically?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it. I got what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you tend to see like, because it's like an average composite variation between the entire focus group. So you do tend to see like those swings and people's like kind of emotional engagement going in and out pretty frequently. So that's not very uncommon at all.
Okay.
When you look at individuals responses, sometimes it's a little bit flatter. But yeah, that's not really uncommon in these sort of analyses.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting.
I see Jeff and Todd are unmuted. You guys have a question, feel free to ask it.
Yeah. I would expect when you're looking at numerous people, you would see less ups and downs because you're kind of averaging them together. It'd be kind of you'd see a trend instead of that spike, everybody going up and down at the same time. When it's a panel, doesn't really make sense to me.
Well, you tend to see like often a little more like sustained bits of engagement, but then people naturally like just kind of tune out with any sort of advertisement at certain moments. So the way that we delivered it in the study is like it just inserted naturally into a TV show. So they'll be like watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy. You try and find as neutral of a TV program as possible. And then just different ads are inserted at the normal commercial breaks. And whatever we're studying or testing is one of those ads. So they don't know that they're actually being measured by it. So that's what I meant more, is that when you look at the individuals, you tend to sometimes see like a little bit more of a sustained engagement peak and then a little more of a sustained distraction. And sometimes when you look at it in composites, it could go up and down a bit. But that's just not really like very uncommon across any of the different sort of neuroanalyses that I've seen from these three companies. But it'd be an interesting question, honestly, like ask the actual neuroscientists more, because I'm more just a conduit as a reporter and a journalist on this stuff.
Gotcha. Thanks.
I saw Evan had his hand raised earlier. Do you have a question, Evan?
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering a little bit more about the dimension of topicality, because I know that was one of the 4 factors. But I was wondering, like for the gorilla example, like I couldn't really tell what was going on, and yet it was still a really effective ad, even with just a gorilla. And I don't know how topical that intro was, except for the awesome, song. So I was wondering how you would explain that.
Yeah. So in that analysis, like that's one that topicality doesn't really apply to very much. It's just more that thinking more about like relatable content to someone, right? Like, is this topical to my interests? So take the Adobe ad, for example. I imagine a lot of us here are marketers who at some point have had to fret about what our quarterly results are going to be, and we have to put it into a board deck or present it to our CEO. And so that sort of content, right, feels really topical and highly relatable. So when it was matched to topics that the audience, the target audience was interested in, because it was looking at social feed ads, right, where you could have that sort of targeting at a particular persona. That's more what that meant there. But there's some ads that are like naturally going to be not topical at all, because they're meant as more like broad, joyful brand awareness campaigns, like the Cadbury ad.
Would you say that like including a relatable song like Phil Collins at the beginning would also fall in the category of topicality, of just like making a connection with someone?
You know what? I don't know. It would be a good question. It would be a good question for my folks over there. From what I remember of that particular study, that's not how they were defining it. There is like emerging research that's really interesting around how music impacts immersion and engagement. That's something that emergent neuroscience has been looking at a lot. They did some partnerships with Spotify to understand how different songs peaked immersion. And I'll try and dig up that research and send it along to Dennis so we can include it in any like follow-up that you guys do. Because the whole music angle hasn't been studied as much, but they're starting to look at it. And that's a really interesting one.
Thanks, Joe. Kind of a chicken and egg question. So these examples you showed the 3 examples. Did they understand the neuroscience, or did they just use basic storytelling techniques?
No, they didn't. It's more of a neural insight, analyze the ads to kind of understand what are the elements that seem to really work. So across that, set over 25,000 ads they've analyzed, that's how they were able to, they were looking for, trends across all these different advertisements. And the branding moments thing was one big conclusion that they pulled out of that sort of meta analysis.
But then flipping the question, knowing what we know now, for brands to take advantage of neuroscience, what would you say is like a first step they ought to consider doing? I
think the branding moments thing can be really actionable. Just thinking about what is that big like aha moment or that surprise point or that turning point in anything that you're making, and putting that into inserting the brand in some way at that moment. Like that is really key. Like the logo, the product, whatever you want them to remember. I think that's a really simple thing that you can do. Probably the biggest thing as well is just the importance of like story, like introducing a character and creating something intriguing that your audience wants to figure out. Like we all know the importance of storytelling in marketing and advertising, but having that off the bat is really crucial too. Like don't have a long kind of intro screen where it's like, this brought to you by our brand. We do X, Y, and Z. And then it is 10 seconds before anything starts, right? That's probably not going to work out. Or just your, boring old white CEO just kind of, pattering on to the camera with no actual interesting story or turn or use of humor. Like that's probably not going to work. So, just using a lot of this is common sense, honestly, that we know as storytellers, that works really well, but it's, validating to see it also confirmed by a lot of this neuroscience research that's coming out.
Got it. Yeah, Melissa says the dreaded talking head.
Yep.
Let's see.
although ironically, I am a talking head here, I guess.
But you had some good slides. So has there been any research done by inserting subliminal advertising? When people are leaning in, you put in a few, a few microseconds of a branding thing. I read a subliminal advertising book way back in the 70s when I was a kid, just because I was a sponge, I guess. It just makes me, it's like, okay, well, this tells you where to insert that little clip.
Yeah, that's a great question. It might work, honestly. I have no idea though. that's not something I've covered, but I'll write it down and ask my guys. Yeah. I saw Michael asked about the written content. So written content is way harder to actually analyze. Like the brain's less stimulated with written content. What I've seen, it's harder to get a good reading on it. I know that I've talked with Dr. Zach quite a bit, and he's told me that they've made progress on being able to capture it well, but I'm personally still like kind of skeptical on how well it works. I also have like some equipment. I've done some like very unscientific studies of my own, particularly around whether it would work for written content, and haven't really found anything that wasn't just super noisy.
Well, I have a sort of question related to that, and I might be stealing some thunder from the book on Storytelling Edge, but did you find out of all the things that you talked about, one particular thing that really stands out in terms of closing a client, if you want somebody to work with Contently? I'm assuming you do some B2B sales, but
yeah, I mean, it's all B2B sales. I think customer stories more than anything like hit so many of the elements that we see work really well. One, having the content be relatable. So this is someone that I can, this is a story that I can see myself in. This is someone like me. Telling that story with a real sense of like conflict and stakes about what they were trying to accomplish, what were the challenges they had to go over, that they had to get over to get to the promised land. And then telling those stories in like a very, call like fluency in the book. So a very easy to understand, engaging sort of way. So writing at a low reading level. If it's in video, like quick cuts, like sound bites, keeping it really short and tight. Those are some of the keys. And I think that, customer stories are consistently just, when you're talking about closing a sale and really winning someone over, probably the most effective format that there is. Although that's like, not all science back that opinion on my part, but I think customer stories, are the most powerful.
Cool. Thanks.
Other questions, and feel free to use the chat if you prefer. Anything from you, Rich?
Well, yeah,
put you on the spot.
It took me a while to do a Google search, but remember, Dennis, way back in 2016 or 2017, we had Dr. Carmen Simon on, and I think Joe, she's a neuroscientist who's done similar work. She used to be with Rexy Media. She came and presented to us. I'm looking for her slides, but I'm mainly curious if what, if anything, has changed in this field of research. This was what 5-6 years ago she came and presented to us, and then are those changes? Are you seeing them in the work that content marketers are doing? To me, I feel like some of this seems intuitive in a sense that it's in the back of my mind as I am working on content. I know I have to hit these notes and it's going to be more effective, but I haven't met any content marketers who are, okay, I'm using neuroscience, this recipe, and this is my approach. It's more like, well, I analyzed the work that's already out there, and I guess I'm using neuroscience effectively.
Yeah. I think the place I see marketers using this the most is just to argue for the importance of storytelling with bosses or colleagues who might not get it. What has changed? There have been just advancements in the actual technology that are really interesting. So one is SST, Steady State Topography, that NeuroInsight developed. Another is fMRI. fMRI technology. So one of the best ways that early on neuroscientists began to understand the way that stories impact the brains is by looking at essentially MRIs of the brain to understand blood flow and which different parts of the brains were activated when you're consuming different sorts of content. This is also like, if you ever read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, on like psychedelics and how psychedelics impact the brain, a similar approach. But they have, like, Spark Neuro has started to develop this technology that allows them to track blood flow in the brain just through a normal headset, which allows them to get like much faster and cheaper readings. Like if you were doing it the old traditional way, you would maybe get, 5 readings a day, and it would take forever and be really expensive to get statistically significant data. The people that I see starting to use this technology the most, because it's still really early, it hasn't fully caught on. There's venture money that's behind a decent bit of this, is in Hollywood. So focus groups are notoriously super unreliable and tell you really nothing useful. There's basically no real statistical connection between focus groups, where people are just pressing a button when they like something or when they don't, and the success of a TV show. So this is where I've seen it start to be applied the most. And Hollywood is also really investing in a lot of these companies. So Spark Neuro is heavily backed by Will Smith, actually, and a bunch of other Hollywood people who are really interested in, like, can we predict whether a TV show is going to be successful using this technology? So I think, like, as with a lot of things, it'll probably catch on in media and entertainment first, and then trickle down to marketers eventually. I like talking about it to marketers because, one, it helps get that buy-in, even if you're not going to use it, right, with your boss. But also just, help folks get ahead of the curve for when, this technology is also more readily available and easier to get. If you are interested, Immersion Neuroscience just came out with kind of a DIY, like, SaaS offering that isn't that expensive. They have plans that start at $200 a month. They just rolled that out. So if you are interested at all, I would recommend checking them out. I'll share their
chat it in there. Thanks.
I'll put it in
Thanks,
I'll put it in the chat.
And I'll thank you for your presentation, your time. And my question was kind of like Dennis's chicken egg, right? And I'm not surprised to hear that Hollywood be on the forefront here. There's a lot more money involved, right? And it'll trickle down to us. Anecdotally, in another lifetime ago, Carolyn and I got to, on an Oracle junket, go to Loyola Marymount at LAX and do the Bob McKee 3-day story seminar, and it was incredible.
That sounds awesome.
If any of you have not seen Bob McKee, go see him while you still can. We learned a lot. I learned how I'm not going to be a screenwriter, but good story affects an emotion in an audience, so they're changed somehow, right? And that protagonist doesn't achieve her goal easily. There's progress and setbacks, right? And they might not achieve it, but I like your comments, Joe, on customer success and your customer as the hero, and make that relatable to that audience so they could see themselves in that success. Anyway, great presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, 100%. Customer stories all the way.
So Joe, we have a question from Lisa in the chat. Can you comment more about conflict and or establishing contrast to be memorable?
Yeah, I mean, like, conflict and tension is what makes a story. Like, there's no story without tension. So that's the key to everything. Like, when we talk about stories being the key to engagement, you have to have real conflict there and real stakes. So, if you think about, like, any of your favorite romantic comedies or action movies, they're all built around this. Like, a rom-com is, the guy wants to get the girl and she doesn't know he exists, but then he starts to get to know her and that conflict gap starts to close. But then the jerk boyfriend comes in and it opens up again. And then he starts to overcome that and the gap starts to close. But then, oh no, he, like, embarrasses himself and crashes into the wedding cake at her brother's wedding, and it opens again until we get to the third act and there's the resolution and the state of bliss. Or it's like Danny Ocean trying to rob the casino and they have a great plan and they almost get there and then it gets messed up. So that, like, opening and closing of that tension gap is just what keeps us on the edge of our seats. I think we all know this as, like, storytellers innately, right? Or as people who have watched a lot of shitty rom-coms and action movies. Not that Ocean's 11 is a shitty movie; it's a great movie. But yeah, it's very key and central to every aspect of storytelling.
All right, let's do one or two more questions. Who's got one?
So how visual is your book? Is the audio book as good as the written word?
You know what? We have like diagrams in there, but the dirty truth about book publishing is that if you try and do like a super visual book, it's incredibly harder to sell because they have to print it in a much different way. So I tried to sell that by partnering with an artist that I really like. And it's a no-go because most publishers only do like one or two of those sort of special printing books a year. So Wiley was not down for it. We do have a good amount of like diagrams and charts and things in the book, but they don't look as great as I would like them to be. The audiobook, actually, this is a point of like huge, it's a sore spot for me because I was supposed to do the audiobook and I was scheduling it. And then just one day, Wiley just licensed the audio rights to someone else and just some random actor recorded the book. And I didn't find out until it was like up on Audible. So I personally hate the audiobook, but people tell me that they like it, but that's just because I am ornery about it, I guess.
There's always a backstory, isn't there?
Yeah. I won't continue to talk anything more bad about my publisher because they do have the rights to my next book and I'm going to start pitching it soon.
Well, if I can't hear Morgan Freeman read it, forget it. I'm just going to read it myself.
Yeah, right.
So just slightly off topic, but still, I think on topic, since you're a creator, have you given any thought to things like NFTs and creator coins?
Oh my God. I really want to get into an NFT play, but I feel still so ignorant about it. Almost one of my tasks I want to do over the holiday break is like really understand like everything Web3 a little bit better. So if anyone has any recommendations on like books, podcasts, anything to listen to that like breaks it down for me simply, like I understand the basics of like blockchain and Web3 and NFTs, but I feel like I don't understand it well enough to have like a really good play there. So if anyone has any recommendations, I would love it.
Well, you might know that Joe Polizzi has gone big into this space. So his new business is called The Tilt. I think it's thetilt.com. So all of his content is all about creators and creator coins and NFTs. So that might be a place to start.
I didn't realize that was like the focus of that. That's great.
Yeah, so it's creator focused, but obviously a big element of that right now is NFTs and tokens.
Yeah, I knew that it was a creators focused play, but I didn't realize it's NFTs. Okay, I'll definitely check that out. I'll give Joe some love during Christmas.
Yeah, reach out. He'll give you some coin.
Oh, that's right. He'll give you some coin.
He will. He's very generous.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Sweet.
Yeah, he just announced a new conference that he's doing that's going to be all purchase your conference tickets using his coin or crypto.
Oh, that's so cool, man. I feel so out of the loop.
Yeah, he partnered with, what's his name? Brian Clark from
Copyblogger. Yeah.
So they're doing an in-person conference and they created the NET, Never Ending Ticket. So it's all tokens.
Oh,
so pretty groundbreaking stuff.
Okay. Yeah. I'll hit those guys up and get the down low from them on what I should be doing. Or I'll just steal all their ideas. I'll make a laser coin.
There you go. I got my my net ticket this morning. I just put a blog in the chat. Great NFT Web3 crypto discussion on Tim Ferriss's podcast.
Okay, great. I love Tim Ferriss. Oh, with Chris Dixon too.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Breaks
it down really well.
Thank you. I will definitely listen to this at the dog park tomorrow.
And on that note, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the holiday potluck with the team today.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, and everyone, thanks for joining us as well. Happy holidays.
Yeah, appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.